Hello and welcome to these Beyond Sessions hosted by the Master in Design for Responsible AI. I'm Andres Colmenares, Director of MDRAI. That's a cohort. Hello, MDRAI 2425. Hello to our guests from the different master programs and those of you watching the recording or the live stream. Thanks for joining. This is the first of 5 sessions that we will be hosting throughout this month and the first week of April, exploring the intersections of a very broad understanding of the design practice with technology, more particularly AI, how it's impacting culture, what can we expect from the now and the next few years in relation to the opportunities, the challenges, particularly for designers, and again, a very broad definition of designers. And to start with today, we have two very special guests. We'll start with Nyangala, who is part of the faculty of our master, and Jessica, who's coming from FabLab Barcelona. And I will pass the mic to them. And for those of you here, and if I know we don't have people in the chat, so for those of you here, after their presentation, we have the mic. So if you have a question or want to share a comment, just raise the hand and I will pass the mic so that it is recorded. We are very happy that you're here. So let's have a nice first Beyond session. Thank you.
Live here. We would love to have you a tiny bit closer. I know it's a horrible thing to ask, but you're so far away. Can we ask you just at least to go like 2 rows up front from where you are at the moment so we can have a bit more of an intimate conversation today? Thank you.
Yeah. A couple of weeks back, Andres showed me this room, and it's not the ideal setting, but we want to make it intimate if we can.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I appreciate that we're closer. Does it work?
Okay, should we start? Hello, everybody. I'm Nyangala Zorlu. I go by she, they pronouns, and I was invited to speak. I've just given a workshop to Andres students from the Masters for Designing for Responsible AI. And I always prefer to do these things in conversation. It doesn't feel right for me to sit here and just like talk to you for an hour. And so it was the perfect opportunity to invite a dear friend and collaborator, Jessica Guy, to join me. So this is why we are not standing behind these podiums, and we're wanting to have a little bit more of a chat with you and people who are watching online. I hope you also feel that it's a bit more of an intimate conversation as opposed to a lecture style at 7 p.m. on a Thursday. Like, no one wants that, let's be honest. So maybe to begin with, yay, it all works. I guess we should just start by introducing ourselves and how we know each other. So would you like to go first? The light is on.
Light is on. Yes, I think it's about how I position it. Exactly. Or not. Okay, so it's lovely to meet you all. It's so nice because actually Nyangala is part of the faculty for the Responsible AI course, and I'm part of the faculty for the Master in Design Emergent Futures.
We brought together the teams.
We brought together the teams, which is beautiful. Just for a little bit of an introduction for the ones who do not know me, I will be preaching to the choir here locally to the people that already know me. My name is Jessica Guy, they, them pronouns, and I have been part of the FabLab Barcelona team over 6 years now already. And at that organization, I'm focusing on reimagining design through the perspective of design pedagogy and the maker approaches. So I work there in different EU research projects and part of the faculty of the Master in Design for Emerging Futures to put in practice some of the things that we will be telling you today of what we're actually also working on as collaborators. This is working really well. And more specifically, I'm really looking into how we in design education, for example, in industrial design education, which is my background in as well, can move away from more unidirectional, hegemonic kind of nature of design towards something that is more plural, and that how we can integrate it in our discipline, generally speaking. So this is going on and off really badly.
If it becomes too much, then maybe we do move behind the very formal podiums. Okay. Yeah, and a little bit of a background on me. I haven't got this formal education in industrial design, but for the past 5 years have been working at the Innovation Growth Lab, which is a policy lab based at Nesta, the UK's Innovation Foundation for Social Good. And here at Barcelona, it's actually hosted at the Barcelona School of Economics, hence why I'm now based here, which is great. And IGL's mission is to help government-specific science and technology ministries or business ministries, those that sit under this umbrella that is innovation, to become more evidence-based and experimental. In very simple terms, to help them be open to new ideas, to help them actually test new ideas, because we've found that innovation policy is not very innovative, surprise, surprise. And given the crises that we're facing as society, as humanity, whether it be climate crisis, whether it be increasing inequality, there is this urgency that innovation, which is coming up with new ideas that can actually help the world, that this really needs to be aligned with what we need as a humanity. And so for the past decades, we have felt that innovation could be doing a better job of that, whether it's funding the right programs, whether it's becoming more diverse and inclusive, so ensuring that students such as yourselves get jobs where you're actually helping to shape the world. This is all part of this umbrella of innovation policy. And my role is to kind of design those learning journeys for policymakers. On the side, I'm also doing a PhD in design where I'm kind of investigating what does it look like to actually design inclusion? What does inclusion look like? Because depending on where you come from or your background, you'll have a different perspective of what this looks like. And so my research is very much exploring that and exploring how policymakers can be aware of the variety of ways that we might want to conceptualize this notion of inclusion. And then here in Barcelona, I get to do really fun things with people like Jess. And maybe we can tell you a little bit about how we met.
Maybe it's me? No, it is the microphone. Okay, I'll go for that. Yeah, it's a very, we're telling this because we not only want to focus on the work that we're doing and like that very professional thing, but also emphasize the importance of getting to know people that work in a similar field with similar interests and values, because sometimes you meet someone that you never expected to become your friend, and all of a sudden you do really great things together. So I assume at this point that the masters that you're doing might be some of those opportunities for getting to know or building your network in the new field of work that you're currently doing or want to do in the near future. So Nyangala and I got to know each other really randomly through a proposal or like an open call for people to apply for funding to do their own research, which is funded by this institution called EU-Institute in Berlin through the project scope called CIRCE, which was looking on the impact that the creative industries can have for more holistic futures. So they were funding a big bunch of people that were doing research as well as creative practitioners. And we actually very randomly met through a call that was talking about how to deal with being a freelancer and in Spain specifically, and got to know each other through that, knowing that we're both in Barcelona and kind of like struggling with the same kind of system that we're part of here. And through that work, we've got to know this brilliant bunch of people that you can see here in the background. You can tell that Nyangala and I both actually have our eyes closed on this picture, so I think it really represents us perfectly well. But yeah, it was a great opportunity for us to actually have funding to do our personal interests and work interests over 6 months, am I right? Yes, over 6 months, and really investigating the areas of research, that some of the things that we will be mentioning as well later on. And through that, a friendship kind of emerged, and now we're here, already working together over a year on our own projects. And I'll hand over back to you in case you want to add anything to it.
Yeah, maybe just to add that I think what was interesting about this particular funding call, which is, let's say, an output of a policy, was that it was really unique in the sense that it was open to anyone who was a resident in Europe. So you didn't have to be a citizen, you could be from anywhere in Europe. And it was unrestricted funding to do whatever you wanted. And what they were interested in was actually finding out what happens if we give young people that we think are doing cool things in Europe unrestricted funding. There were some parameters. There had to be this focus on a societal dimension. So you weren't just allowed to do an artistic project. It would have to be linked to you wanting to make the world a better place in some way. But in general, we were just free to hang out. And I can speak personally for myself, but I think a lot of the fellows, there were 40 of us in total, and then there were some organizations. I think in terms of people, sometimes we were 140 in a room with, you know, access to this opportunity to try out new ideas, to learn from each other, to make connections, was not only being able to kind of finalize that particular project that was being funded, but then as a result of the connections being made and the links that we were able to make across Europe between our projects and our desires to, you know, help young people be more involved in design processes, or to help social movements have a way to be able to express themselves better. There was such a variety of different innovative ideas, and those connections allowed us to continue working together. And so I think it's a really great example of how a policy, depending on how it's designed, can actually be like a great starting point for many other projects to kind of stem off the back of it. So going into the first topic that I think would be really interesting for us to kind of deep dive on is this notion of design education. So everyone here in the room, or the majority of you, are pursuing a design education, and there's obviously a tradition that this discipline emerges from, and there's also an evolution of what this discipline is. And Jess is the perfect person to talk about some of this, but honestly, like, why is there a need to evolve design education? Isn't design just like wonderful as it is?
Lovely, thank you. Yes, let's start on where all of this comes from. And I'm mentioning this exactly because of that question. The question that centers my work, looking at design education and trying to understand what impact it has, how is it being done, what is the pedagogical aspect of it, but also what is being taught. And how does influences not only the educational path, but then later on the career, and then later on an ecosystem that is fostered and further perpetuated, let's say, through those practices. And design, in my perspective, is one of those very transversal practices that goes along so many disciplines and industries. So I believe it has a massive impact in the trajectory of where we are in climate crisis and poly-crisis issues. So hence, if you may go to the next slide, for me personally and some of the other scholars that I've been involved with and reading and being thankful enough to be able to indulge in, is their perspective is that design is such a fundamental aspect of our everyday life and we don't always know it. We think that everything just kind of works sometimes. It's like I take the metro, I go to school, I go to work, I use my phone, I dress myself. But all of these things that we are engaging with on an everyday level, like from this microphone to what I wear to how I move in the city, is a design practice. And in return, while we are so much involved into it, and while we, particularly in this room, are calling ourselves designers, we think that there's only this aspect of us influencing design. So we are the person that says, okay, I will make this shoe and this shoe will look like this and therefore the user will engage with that, or I will make this phone and this is happening. It's not only that direction, it's not only us designing stuff, but everything that we design in return also designs us. It has influence over us. And I think the phone is one of those perfect examples for me because I don't know if you are aware or you're not, it depends completely on who you are, but when you are in the metro, what do people do? Exactly. They're here, they're there, but actually all of our faces are always connected to our phones. Like it's completely, we're in our little bubble, in our little universe. So when we created this object of design, it's a design object, we didn't only create this, but we created a whole habit, a ritual, a culture that happens around this object. So whenever we together talk about design, we really want to emphasize the importance of taking design seriously and not just talking about design as being something aesthetic and something that makes things pretty, but essential of our everyday life and that creates not only an impact negatively or positively, however you want to take it, but also really in return designs our everyday habits and rituals. And I think that's very important to take into consideration. So yes, you may. Thank you. So when we look at where does this actually all come from, I always love to show a little bit of the evolution of why we came to the point where we are today. Some of you that are from the Master in Design of Emerging Futures maybe have heard of some of these things that I'm talking today, but generally speaking, design is a relatively new industry and practice. When we look into the history of design, before the 1950s, actually, mainly the work around design, generally speaking, was around the work of a craftsperson. So when people are working on crafts, maybe with wood, metal, glass, or whatever it is, that was the main practice of design, quote unquote. And then throughout the century, when we come into when the Bauhaus has established, the Bauhaus is one of the most fundamental universities that actually established this idea of what it means to be, for example, a product designer or industrial designer or architect. This is when one of these very big moments, especially within Europe, where we established the idea of what design is and can be, formalizing and intersecting actually this idea of crafts, architecture, art, nature-based solutions back then as well, and trying to go away from a very crafts perspective towards something that can be mass-produced, industrial scale, linear production style. And that in its sense was maybe part of the industrialization, maybe needed at that point, when we actually look at how that is being taught or how that was being taught back then in, when the Bauhaus established. While the Bauhaus had beautiful ideas of how to revolutionize crafts in the industrial sector, it also came with a lot of downsides. They talked back then about inclusivity. They were saying, oh, our school is going to be open for everyone. But in reality, when a woman applied for one of their for example, for architecture, in the university, they were not allowed to be actually part of the architecture classes. They had to do more traditional crafts, which were connected to textiles and similar kind of works. So while they said this should be open for everyone and everyone can do anything, there was still a very patriarch and hegemonic nature towards that design education. And unfortunately, and fortunately in the same time, the Bauhaus has been incredibly influential until today on how we teach design. So as I mentioned, there are some notions of that incredibly beautiful, that intersection, interdisciplinary approach. It has a great aspect, but with this idea of the Bauhaus, unfortunately came also notions such as what is considered good design is still something that is mainly in the hand of a few and therefore doesn't have the necessary plural view and doesn't take into perspective many different cultures and perspective, generally speaking, perspectives in what good design can be. So when we're talking about how we are imagining design today, we're really looking at, on one aspect, the design pedagogy part, what is being taught, who's being left out in that conversation, and how we can actually move away, generally speaking, from this very product-orientated, this linear production of like extracting the resources and creating designs out of that, but more of the positive side of what design can do, so de-objectifying design towards an idea of being more of a facilitator, using our skills as designers not only to make things pretty, basically speaking. I think there was one more slide and I made, yeah, exactly. I always love to show the slide. Exactly. And why I'm saying this is because we live, and all of you know this, I'm preaching to the choir for sure, because all of us do the work that we're doing today because we don't think it's fine what's happening right now. I really believe in the capacity of design to be an agent of change, and us being agents of change makers in that sense. So we essentially need to move away from this old notion of how we've been doing design in the past. I think there's another slide. Exactly. And one of those possibilities on how we can de-objectify design and how we can look into a design education, basically speaking, that maybe moves towards the necessities that we need today, is, as an example, and there are many different ways on how this can be done. Like there's a great example like the School of Commons in Zurich. There's here La Creatura, which is a non-formal educational group of people that focus on supporting especially women and with immigrant background, and as well transgender people, and so on and so forth, to engage in different disciplines. So there's many different examples on how design education can be looking like, but one of the examples I always love to share is to not talk about necessarily of the industry that we work in, to talk about, we're doing product design or graphic design or whatever, but actually move one step before that and say, what are the values that we center in our practice, and take those value-driven design approach to whatever practice and whatever application field that we want to do. Because if we start design with our values, then it has really a potential to do that change that we might be imagining. And I'm mentioning this because values can help for a collective of beings to identify with that, create a common agenda. It can help to create a community structure, and it has and it can really kind of support how we relate to each other as well as designers or as just people in our society. And that's why Anna will show later some very practical approaches how we can actually center values in our approach when we do design. I've been already talking way too much. Yeah, does it work?
Let's see, can we... We'll keep passing the mic back and forth. But I think also to add to everything that Jess explained, I'm the only designer in my team. I'm the only designer in my organization. When we look at the kind of host organization, so Nesta, there is a team and a department of designers, but it's still kind of the minority in a much wider organization. And so aside from evolving design education to allow it to have more pluriversal ideas, to equip designers to really solve the challenges of our time, I also think that there's a need for designers to see their role not just in traditional design studios or traditionally making products and services, but also working in more diverse sectors. And it's incredible because we're starting to see this trend already happening. There is a growing community of designers in government. There's GovLab that's based in the UK government that has really grown as a bit of an experiment. So they actually didn't have any core funding from government, and a bunch of designers decided to create this GovLab and use the kind of additional funding that departments would have if they were going to be able to, oh dear. Sorry about that. So to basically run their services off the back of extra budget that departments would have, which is a huge risk, right? Because you're basically saying, we hope that the extra money that these departments don't want to use for themselves, they will come to us and invest in us. And GovLab has been running for over a decade now because of the usefulness of that service. And they have been going through a review. So 2 years ago, this was set up because while it was known that this GovLab and having designers in government was something that was useful, it was very difficult for them to explain exactly how or what, which resonates so much with how I feel in my team. Like, people come to me all the time, but when I have to explain exactly what I do, it becomes a little bit more challenging. But I think that this space that design occupies, which if we look historically, so Alexandra Midal has written a really great book on new design histories, and she speaks about this. Design has been this discipline that emerged, and it's sort of attached itself sometimes to architecture, and it sometimes attaches itself to art, but it's kind of neither here or there. And, you know, does design exist outside of these disciplines that are a lot more established? I think it does, and I think it's still finding its footing. And as we enter this world that has more uncertainties and has these complex challenges that actually these established disciplines are finding very difficult to kind of crack, I think it's this role of the designer that is weaving the way between disciplines that can be really useful. And so I encourage you all, as you're developing your practices, as you're thinking what you might want to do after you finish your studies, to think beyond the boundaries that are kind of traditionally set there, because that's probably where you're going to really achieve the greatest impact. It can be a little bit lonely to be the only designer in my team, but I see that it has been so useful for them to have me. And so meeting other designers like Jess, based in Barcelona, being part of these community of designers in government, finding kind of peers, even if you're maybe kind of the singular person, is a way to cultivate this sense of an evolving design practice. Okay. I'm going back. gotta go back to the dog. So now thinking about this idea of designing for good, I think there's so many ways that we might already critique this word, and that's the reason why I've kind of put it in parentheses, right? Like, good for whom? What is good? But I think that we have some really, really great examples out there in the world. And so Jess and I wanted to come and share some that we know from our own practice to really try to make it concrete when we talk about this evolving role of the designer, when we talk about designing in aid of transformation. What does this actually look like in practice? And maybe I pass to you, Jess, to start us off on a few examples.
The beauty is that there's so many, and the struggle is to decide which ones to show. Yes, thank you so much. Down here or here? No. Technical topics? No. Haha, it's up. It's very confusing. Okay. Anyways. As so beautifully already summarized by Niangala, moving from design education and like the evolving possibilities for designers to be part of transformation. Both of us have very different entry points for that. While we work together and in this evolving space and trying to understand what is the responsibility of a designer, we both of us kind of like entry at different points. As I mentioned beforehand, my work mainly focuses on educational spaces and the pedagogy around that. And that can be very transversal, and I know Niangala works with that as well, so it's not like anything like this. But one of the examples that I wanted to show, going back to what I mentioned prior about the values, is the project that we did that was hysterically called Data for Good. And it's really good to mention that because it was exactly that question of when we create a challenge, a 1-week immersive design experience where we take environmental data, how can we use that data for something good? Not just for collecting it for the sake of the collecting data, but actually utilize that to create a change in our local ecosystem. So the example that I'm showing is a very recent example when I went to Budapest, to Mome, to the Moholy-Nagy University in Hungary, which Moholy-Nagy was one of the key figures in the Bauhaus. So it was like a beautiful moment for me to bring together that old notion of the Bauhaus, the new notion of it, and then to be able to be there at that place where he was teaching many years ago, to try to implement some of the ideas that he had as a designer, as an activist, and some of the ideas that we are bringing up for our work, and trying to like land them in this space through through an approach that I haven't tried prior to this. So this 1-week immersive learning experience was basically bringing together multiple students from the design university that all do different things. Some of them do digital object making, some of them do marketing stuff, some of them are crafts orientated. And the challenge for them in that week was, how can I use environmental data to identify a topic within my local setting, that meaning Budapest, to create an intervention, a design a proposal that tries to support how we can address that environmental protection. Environmental protection topics. So what we tried, instead of just giving lectures and tell them how to use sensors and do like a unidirectional approach of how we're very much known in design education that often happens, is like, I know the stuff and you listen and then you do. We try to kind of like shift that hierarchy within that week and very much let the students lead what happens within that week. And one of the ways that we were doing this is through a value-driven design approach. So what we were doing, what you can see here on the left, is that we were going to different places in the city, and one of the values that the students mentioned that were really important to them was talking about openness and collaboration, and really a way of like a very democratic kind of way of doing design. So we kind of really quickly adopted that design approach in that week, and we were saying, okay, let's do, wherever we go, we're gonna do a centering exercise, and that centering exercise will basically focus on one thing. We will go to the place of sensing, let's say this is here in the forest. We will come together, and instead of just immediately using our sensing devices and be like, okay, I put it here and I will collect this data about air quality and this humidity and whatever, we're like, no, what do we actually sense with our bodies? Use our bodies first to understand where we are, because we're in such a rapid, quick, all the time moment that we sometimes forget to use our bodies as sensors as well. So we're coming into a circle, we were taking our time, we were closing our eyes, and we were sensing with our bodies first, making the assumption, what do we feel? What do we understand from this position and this place at this moment? Taking really like a breathing exercise to start this, and by writing down all of our thoughts that we were finding while we were doing this, to then later come back, when we come back together in the studio, and then take actually a look at these fancy devices, and then compare that data. What was my assumption when I was there, to compare it with what actually quantitative data tells me, and how does this compare to each other? And that is really interesting, because so many times in that moment when the students came back together in the studio, it's like, I assumed this happened, but then they compare it with the data and it doesn't match, and sometimes it does. And I think this is a very interesting approach to then go into and critically think, why was I thinking like this? And not just go with the flow and just be like, I think this, blah, blah, blah. It really engages more with that critical thought and critical thinking approach through the values that the students mentioned in the beginning. So here's just another picture of that example where you can see that there was a different location. We were in the city already at that point when we did very much the same approach here. You can see us all closing our eyes and doing that centering exercise to really understand how we feel and what we're sensing in that moment. And then later on, we took this data to create the interventions. But this is one of the examples on how a different approach to design education can look like, and it's not in the classroom at all. It's actually out there in the place. And I'm not going to show this at all. Maybe this to show a little bit of a video in the background. There's no need for the actual audio for this. Another really great example that I wanted to show how design can be put in practice very differently is this project that's called Flip Floppy. It's on Lamu Island. Lamu Island is in the front of the Kenyan coast, and what they're facing, a struggle that they're facing there, this is a part of the island, is that there's an incredible amount of waste, plastic waste specifically, that is landing every day on that island shores. And the people that live on that island are not the makers of that waste. The MDF students know this example too well, because I mentioned that only like 2 months ago to them, but I will repeat it just because of the beauty of this project. But the images that you see in the background shows very well the issues that they're facing with the tremendous amount of plastic that is arriving there. So what the Flip Floppy project is doing is actually a fourfold, let's say. On the one hand, it is addressing the plastic pollution in terms of collecting and sorting the plastic that is landing on the island, as well as training people that live around there to understand how to sort and how to make new products out of that plastic waste. And one of the examples that they apply this to is creating a dhow. A dhow is a traditional boat from that region. And so you can see there how a designer's approach, in combination with real environmental challenges, in combination with traditional heritage making techniques, in combination with new technologies such as digital fabrication, comes together and really creates objects in that moment actually, but also intervention that are meaningful towards the community locally. And I don't know how to do the next page. It's not going anywhere. Ahora. The design approach there is not maybe so obvious, because if you are like a traditional industrial designer, you look at this and you're like, this is not industrial design. but actually that this is design. The understanding of the ecosystem, the understanding of the challenges, to be able to address this with an educational model that upskills people, that creates jobs in for the local economy, and then ultimately, which is the beauty and why I will hand over in a second to Nyangala, is that actually multiple of the East African countries, after they've done incredible amount of activities in the region of like creating awareness around plastic pollution, they, in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, were able to put in place a policy around a single-use plastic ban for 5 different countries on the African continent. And that shows how a designer in practice can actually support a change and support on a larger scale a policy change. So that is one of of course this is not something that happened with 1 week, like the example that I was showing prior, but if you are engaging through a value-driven design approach, if you are engaging with real-life challenges as a designer and use your transdisciplinary skills with the communities that you're part of, then there's really the opportunity as a designer to be part of a transition, of a transformation that we want to see in the future. And there's another beautiful example that you wanted to share.
Let's just go back quickly. Yeah, just to add a little bit on this particular project, because it's just such a brilliant example on so many levels. There's an aspect of scale that is required for a great idea to actually become an innovative idea. And part of that is not only the solution working in your individual context, but it being able to kind of scale into lots of different contexts. And that's kind of the added element that really makes something go from just a good idea to an innovative one. And the policy impact that this was able to have on the 5 African countries is a sign of that policy impact. And the Dow boat actually ended up then also going to the Great Lakes, which is no longer on the coast of Africa, but a different location, to do advocacy around the project and, of course, raising awareness of the use of plastic. Again, this is a sign of a design project having a view of the different systemic layers that it needs to operate in. It's not just about building the boat with the plastic that's been recycled. It's not just about changing the coast of Lamu. It's actually about beginning this change, beginning to kind of enable this change beyond. And as Jess so rightly mentioned, that plastic is not necessarily coming from the African continent. And my family are from Mozambique, and I'm always just shocked at picking up plastic on the beach and seeing where it comes from. You know, like as far as Singapore or however you want to kind of consider it, like that plastic flows. So when thinking about the impact of this project, it's now starting to see the scale on, let's say, the African continent on policy in Africa. But the idea is that it will be a project that will continue to have an impact, and hopefully even at a global scale. And it's just a really great example of designing for good. To maybe go back a little bit to also give a bit of background to how I got into the design world. One of my first jobs out of my master's was working for a tech justice organization called Eyewitness. And this was back in 2015-16. And during that time, Eyewitness was funded by the International Bar Association, and there was just this proliferation of images on social media of atrocity crimes happening around the world. And quite regularly, news organizations would call up the International Bar Association to get them to talk on TV about this footage that was coming out of these conflict regions. And unfortunately, from a legal perspective, they couldn't actually say anything about it. I mean, of course, you could see people being, killed or just horrible scenes, but actually in a court of law, this evidence was completely useless. And so the lawyers of the International Bar Association got this idea to create a mobile phone application that would allow human rights defenders, people on the ground, to capture footage that would automatically have the authentication and verification needed for it to be admitted in court as evidence. And so this was a solution that came from lawyers and technologists, and this picture is actually from one of the missions that happened in Ukraine back in 2016. As we know, that conflict still continues today, but the idea is that this documentation is already happening, and should it need to be used, it is readily available. When I joined, I was the third person to join Eyewitness's team. The rest were lawyers. And when I tell you, this app was horrible. Like, it was designed by lawyers. So I don't know if I need to say anything else. But through the course of these years, they felt like they had this amazing solution, and they were wondering why some people were using it, but not the amount of people that they thought should be using it. And of course, the prototyping, the testing, the design approach that I was able to bring to the second version of the application that was designed was extremely instrumental. And the idea that I had to argue to the lawyers was, you guys are really, really great in making sure that this app works for you as lawyers who are trying to collect evidence for court. You're really, really bad at designing this for someone on the field that needs to very quickly open this up, take the footage, doesn't have the best bandwidth in terms of internet. So, you need to have a way to kind of allow uploads to be really fast. There were all these considerations that they just hadn't really given any notice to, because they were designing a product, a service for themselves. And I think that there are many, many more examples, maybe even ones that we can think of ourselves, or where we've designed something for us because we think it's cool and we think it's good, but are we really designing it for everyone else that needs to be engaged in this particular solution? Another footage there. So fast forward to 2023, a kind of spin-off project off of this CERSI network that we ended up meeting each other on. We went to Bulgaria to run a very short design sprint with young people there. This was in the northwest region of Bulgaria. It's actually one of the poorest regions in Europe if we look at sort of indicators for education and access to jobs, GDP, etc. And as a result, Bulgaria has a massive issue of depopulation. As soon as people can get out of there, they do. And as a result of that, there are a lot of abandoned buildings. But in the summers, people come back to visit their family members who remain there. And so our design project was to test whether we could allow these young people who were returning to their homelands to reimagine what they might want these public spaces to look like. It was so incredible to be part of a process where we knew we wanted to try things, but we actually knew for sure that we were going to learn so much more from the young people themselves. And here you can see an example of one of them. They sort of prototyped what they might do with an abandoned cinema. And when you give people the tools that we ourselves as designers sort of take for granted, to just see people light up and to be able to imagine the space that they're from in a different perspective, it might not be something that has scaled, and I don't know if that abandoned building will necessarily be changed, but it was a project that got the attention of the municipality, who were then interested in the ideas of the young people, who were then interested in providing a youth group for them. And so it's these small sparks that a designed object or a design artifact or a design project can enable and do that is really worth sort of investing in and thinking about. I'll skip over that. That's just me teaching students. The ones who have been in the class with me today will know. But the idea is that as well as allowing others to participate in design processes, like that young boy who participated in our project. I think it's also about returning to the first point, evolving what we teach students like yourselves, so that when you go out into the workplace and into the world, you're sort of thinking about things a little bit differently. So now, just to kind of round off and kind of looking ahead, I'd love to know about something that excites you about design today. What's got you excited, Jess?
We ask you later as well, so maybe you can think about that already in your minds. Because, of course, we're open later for questions that you might have. But we would love to know as well from you, maybe some of the practices that you see emerging that excites you. So have that in mind, so we can start the conversation about this in a moment. Actually, I know you're going to mention maybe some of the things already, so I will not, because I will not take your ideas. But I will say something that I actually mentioned in a conversation with one of the people that sits here in the crowd prior, is that I'm continuing that research around design education and how it can shift. And I recently read a report by a European project that focuses on what are the future skills that we need for the creative and cultural industries to kind of address the complex societal and economic and environmental challenges that we're facing. That report is incredibly long. It's 200 pages. I don't know who reads this, apparently me. But I would love this to be digested somewhere so people can access it and can take a look at it, because it's really well researched. It's like many thousand people have been taking part in the interviews, in the surveys. The literature review is incredibly extensive and it's really, really well researched, but then it's 200 pages and I'm the nerdy person that reads that. So it's kind of like, it doesn't have the impact maybe it could have. In any case, one of the things that I read in there really got me excited, particularly actually just yesterday. And they talk in that report around competency ecosystems. Something that I mentioned to Julia that sits here right in front of me just a moment ago. Why am I mentioning this? I think sometimes as a designer we think that we are individuals that need to solve all the problems of the world. But we're not. We're sitting here in this space where many of us have similar goals, similar values, similar things that we're trying to change. That's why we do the master degrees, the undergrads, the upskilling sessions, the learning experience that we do, because we kind of believe that there is the potential for change to happen. And we should always leverage on that ecosystem, on this network of people that we get to know, to be able to work on things together and not think that we have to solve everything alone. Because the beauty is not in being alone, but the beauty is in the togetherness. Even if it comes with friction and tension and complicated aspects, there is so much potential behind that. And competency ecosystems, what this report is saying is basically, instead of focusing design education or education itself in trying to develop skills in an individual, is looking at how we can foster an ecosystem of people, a connection between people, where the skills of the individuals can complement each other. So the approach is way more in creating collaborative learning environments rather than unidirectional frontal education that just like tries to put as much stuff in our brain as possible. In an individual brain, but really focus on that coexistence and how we can live in a future where we rely more on each other and supporting each other when we do design interventions as such we saw before, from the app to Flip-Floppy to other projects that can really leverage on the community in that sense. So when you ask me about what excites me is reading these things, these ideas about learning ecosystems that work more on a collective sense, on a collective intelligence, rather than focusing on the individual goals that an individual person might have. So that really excites me for sure. But I know there's something else that excites you as well. And it excites me as well, but I was not allowed to say it.
Well, now I have to think of something else.
No, you need to say it.
Okay. Well, as you were talking, I thought of two things, and one sort of came off the back of the workshop and the lesson that I just gave to the Masters Designing for Responsible AI. I think that there is a potential for the kind of sciences to weave themselves with the arts that has been spoken about for many, many years now. There's been talk of, we need to move from STEM to STEAM. It's not just about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. No, we need to nudge in the arts in there. But it just seems to have either fallen on deaf ears or people just don't really know how to do it. And as a result of the technological advances that we're seeing, which from one end can seem a bit scary, right? The rapid pace at which ChatGPT has taken over our lives. And when you were talking about this report, I was like, have you tried this tool that basically turns it into a podcast? It's really good. I highly recommend. Yeah, all the students are nodding. They're like, right? That's really great, and that's really exciting. But also there's a part of me that thinks no one's ever going to read anything anymore. But the point is that there is this potential to use these tools in creative ways that shape them for the better. And for the better can be, very much dissected however you see fit. But I believe in what you're saying, right? They're values and principles that we can bring to everything that we do. And so the final thing that really excites me is just the community that is forming around people who care. And some of us may call ourselves designers, and some of us may not feel comfortable with that and have a multi-hyphenate byline that we use. But the idea is people out there in the world trying to make the world a better place. And I think that that's just really exciting. So if you meet anyone who you think is cool, let them know and add them on social media or something, do something. So yeah, we open up to questions if there are any.
Are there any questions, thoughts in the room? Who is?
I'm Patricia. I'm from the Master in Responsible AI. I first thank you. It was really great. And so I just... It's not... Wait. Okay. So should I repeat? So I'm Patricia. I am from the Master in Design for Responsible AI. Thank you for the session. It was really nice. I wonder if, I think you put it in an amazing way, how design is part of everyday's life, and it's even more important when we have so many new technologies that are inviting us to review the way we do things. So I think it's a great example of, it's not about what we in the past would think about design. Design about a product. Or no, actually we have the design. Once, many years ago, I was in a course and someone said, technology went off the technology, meaning it's not only job from the IT team to know technology. And I think what we are now understanding is that design is beyond designers. It's not just something that belongs to a specific function, but it should be embedded in other areas. So I would like to know if your ideas about this, because is there an opportunity for us to start thinking about in corporations? Should we start thinking about the designer Like, because usually what we have is technology. So when you have digital products in traditional companies, you usually have the business person that doesn't know anything about tech, and you have the tech person that doesn't know too much about the business. And I personally have been struggling to say, okay, but I have a function here, right? So I can bridge this. And I was listening to you and I thought, oh, maybe that's a designer. And to the ones that work in more traditional companies, we don't have this function. And I think it could be a very good start to start saying, we need a designer. Like, companies should think about, I need a designer to create these new business models, you know, to think about this person, to think about this position. Do you think it makes sense, or like?
I can go first. Thank you so much for your question, Patricia, because I think it really resonates with what I see even in my work. That the way that I would almost like try to generalize it is that you have a technical expert, and then you maybe have the enabler or the strategic or the ops person. And I think traditionally things were able to operate in that way by just having kind of the technical expert and someone kind of leading with the operational side of things. But as we start to really try to tackle these more complex societal challenges where there isn't one clear solution, where the strategy is also unclear, and guess what? The technologist and the business person, they don't really know what is going to work. And maybe they've even already failed 2, 3, 4 times, and they're kind of at the end of their motivation for trying to try a 5th time. That's where I think it becomes so much more obvious where the designer's role is useful. Why? Because the designer doesn't come with a solution, but it comes with a process. And what I find in my work and why it's so valuable is I'm not the expert in the room. I know that everyone else is an expert, whether it be the policy expert or the economist or whoever it is. But together, they're unable to kind of flow through a process that's going to lead to the desired outcome. And as the designer, I'm able to sort of like weave that path and to think about the kind of end product or the end object beyond the immediate, to think about this kind of longevity that it needs to have. And so I think that the more complex the world becomes and the fewer obvious solutions that emerge in lots of different sectors, right? We're talking about finance, climate, health. I think that we're going to increasingly see a calling for designers, and we're now starting to see more innovation designers. The Netherlands government have just kind of publicized new roles, and so I think that this designer role is going to be something that will be more and more useful because of that process that we're able to bring.
I don't think I can add that much. You already said everything. But no, I just resonate so much what you said and what you were saying beforehand as well. Is like, I think the designer's role is really moving away from this object-orientated aesthetic as orientated to way more this idea of being a translator and facilitator. And that has a space in almost all industries or intersecting industries somehow. Because it's doing exactly what you say, focusing on that process rather than a specific outcome all the time. So I think the beauty is in that the way we think, the way we approach the world as designers is inherently interdisciplinary. And we are capable of making the connections so many times that maybe others don't necessarily see because they have a more in-depth approach towards their own expertise, but we live in the intersections. So yeah, completely resonate with what you said. Is there anything else? Oh, Andrea.
Papa, sì.
Need to kind of like.
Okay. Hello, I'm Andrea, and probably this is a not politically correct question, but because I know another project similar to Flip Floppy that is called Super Local. I don't know if you know that. And I mean, we are designers for change the world, for change the society or whatever. But at the same time, there is a lot of projects that are not in this society, but in another. Like, for example, Super Local is set in Tanzania. So, I mean, now we are here, and how we can change here, not in another. Because I think that here is more difficult to change. And I don't know, it's just a reflection about.
Well, yeah, this is one project that we can mention. No, I agree with you. Like, not all answers make sense in all places, right? But if we, generally speaking, work towards a more open and sharing approach, then it's a combination between being able to be open and share things and make it public and make it accessible, and that's another story, because just because you share something on the internet doesn't mean that everyone has access to it. But it's this part of like being able to share, make things accessible, make them known, so other people can learn from what you've experienced. And really, on the other hand, is the understanding of really your local context and understanding the complexities of your situation. The thing is that very likely there are challenges that are universal, there are challenges that are shared in different locations. It doesn't mean that maybe the project that you're mentioning in Tanzania has the same challenges or the same objectives that they want for transformation in their local environment that we might have here in Barcelona, but there might be another country, another region, another city, another town that actually faces the same challenges or wants to address the same issues. So if we are capable of sharing that and making that accessible for other areas, then this is where the beauty lies, in my opinion. So maybe in our case, maybe there's something that we need to focus on here in Barcelona in terms of, for example, accessibility of paperwork to be able to work here. That's an incredibly important work that we need to do in Barcelona. And there might be other countries and other cities that face the same, I guess, political topic. So if we can share that between those locations, then that is amazing. And one way how we try to, Nyangala and I have collaborated in the past on a European project that was called Make Africa, or Make European African Digital Innovation Ecosystem. It was like a very long name. But what we did there is basically bringing together European makerspaces and African makerspaces to share their challenges, share their barriers and their areas of opportunities with each other. Because if you focus on the challenge itself, it was focusing on the makerspace's challenges. And that makerspace is very similar, or can be also different, of course, but can be very similar in different locations. Maybe they face the same issues with structural funding, skilled employees, reaching out to communities, right? That can be very transversal beyond any makerspace. And what the work was done, work that was done there is actually sharing those challenges and seeing the areas of opportunities. And then the work that we've been doing together in a specific workshop was actually then helping those makerspaces to be able to translate those and how to be able to go to their local policymakers and make sure that they understand why makerspaces are important and why they need to get funded. So that's one of the examples how that like more global approach versus hyper-localized approach can work in sync. But it's about understanding your local context in the end, and about understanding how we can make information more accessible so that people can reach each other. I think there's another question. I don't know if you want to add something now.
Just really quickly, I wanted to add that I think also being able to identify the ingredients that are similar. So there's a really incredible project based here in Barcelona, but very much informed by practices around the world. So I'm going to completely butcher the name, but mejillones, mussels, mejillones. They create waste. You eat them, there's a shell, they usually go in the bin, but actually they can be reused to create a new form of material, and lots of different kinds of material, from material that mirrors more fabric to material that mirrors more concrete. And it's of course a more sustainable way of being able to build and to construct. And this particular project that is led by Ana Ortero here in Barcelona was using, let's say, the recipes. What these makers are doing is sort of cooking. They're cooking with this waste product and creating from vases to other end products with this waste material. And the recipe that they would use in Chile or Mexico was of course not exactly what they could use here in Barcelona, because our ocean has different oxidity. There's certain contextual elements of the sea here in Barcelona versus the ocean in Latin America that are not the same, but the ingredient is. And so with a little bit of testing and tweaking, this great idea from Latin America was then able to be transported to Barcelona. And I think it's about not closing ourselves off and saying, well, you know what happens like across the world doesn't matter to me, but being really aware of like the principles, the nuggets, the ingredients that we might be able to bring to our own context. And then of course, having the autonomy to test what works here, and sort of being able to share ideas and learn from each other, not just in one location, but across the world. And you know, there's a reason why the internet is such a great tool.
Hi, is this working? Okay. I'm Tatiana from Brazil, Masters in Design for Responsible AI. Thank you for your lecture or conversation. Not working it. Okay. Considering this context of local versus global and exporting, importing solutions, this is something that I don't actually know how to formulate as a question, but just as a thought that I don't know how to settle. But basically, it's bad to design for yourself because you're designing with your own biases. But it's also bad to design for communities that you don't have access to or you're not a part of, because again, you have your own biases and you don't fully know, as we experienced today in class, you don't fully know who's in the other side. Also, it's bad to design for something far away, but it's also bad to design if you're not there. So, you know, how do you choose who
Don't do anything.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm quitting the master. No, just kidding.
No, I think you raise a really important point. I remember having a very similar conversation, not around designing, but around research in general. So I had a friend that was working with a community that they were not a part of, and they felt super uncomfortable by it. But this friend of mine was the person that had the skills, the capabilities, the access to the funding, the access to the institution to actually be able to help this community. And so the way around that, I think, is exactly the masters that you're doing, right? It's responsibility. How do we design responsibly? How do we research responsibly? How do we ensure that we are doing no harm with our approach? And there are many, many ways to butcher engaging with communities and to completely exploit them for your own interest. But there are also many, many ways to really co-design and to ensure a mutually beneficial relationship. And I think that we shouldn't think that it is beyond us to create relationships that are non-hierarchical. I think it's so easy for us to go in already with this notion that there's always going to be a hierarchy, whether it's researcher, user, whether it's designer and community. But it doesn't actually have to be that way. There are actual ways where we can level the playing field. There is a really great research project that was funded by the EU called ProEthics that was looking specifically at research and innovation and how to, in an ethical way, include more participative processes. So in medicine, this is actually very, very advanced. So clinical practitioners know that they have to engage with patients. Like, there's no way you're going to design health services without engaging it. But I think other disciplines, technology or even innovation, we're still sort of worlds behind acknowledging the ways that we can, in an ethical and in a responsible way, engage with the communities that we're working with. But there are definitely ways that you can do it. So don't quit the masters just yet.
Yeah, no, totally. I think you're already asking the right questions. I think many people go into the design discipline and don't ever ask and don't ever critical review their practice. So asking and critically being critical about your work is absolutely essential. So you being able to ask us and you already having that part of your thought process, I think, is essential for a good pathway, quote unquote. But also this means, and I think this is, I love to say this, is like knowing when not to design, right? Knowing when you don't need to intervene and don't need to be part of something. And then being able to just step back. And being able to sense that is one of the most critical skills that we need to learn, because we always think we need to do something, but sometimes doing something is creating more harm than actually giving positive impact and so on. So I think in the end it's more about our attitude than actually sometimes what we do.
If I may quickly add, I'm a big advocate of, as designers, very broad label, not necessarily having getting a master to call yourself a designer, but someone who practices design, and design as a decision-making practice, very, basically speaking, is just the awareness, acknowledging questions as design tools. Sometimes, as you were just saying, is this bad? Should I do this? It's already like in your toolkits as designers is, I would say, the most important tool, right? And it's an art, in a way, just to design a question or like to give shape of a question, know how, when to use it, all of that. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. And here we have another question or comment.
Thank you so much. I'm Ramon. Maybe I'm repeating myself a little bit with all we've been talking, but I wanted to maybe emphasize a little bit more on the idea of biases, no? And how design, if we open the spectrum so much on the idea of that ethical design should be for everyone, could not that kill a little bit the cultures or the rooted biases that sometimes are bad, but sometimes that also give a self way of expression or reflection and identity to the designer, no? What is this fine life to have a balance between designing something that is actually not hurtful for nobody, but in a way it has your identity or your cultural or your background identity, so it doesn't lose and the world doesn't become all the same a little bit, no?
Totally. And I think this idea that a design can be for everyone is a bit outdated in itself. Like, design can never be for everyone. There are too many different needs, desires, opportunities, that because we're all so different, you cannot do everything for everyone. There will be, and we need to be aware of that, and knowing when you design with a specific community for that specific context versus an individual group of 3 people versus, for a global community of people. Like, you need to be aware of that. So very much agree with what you're saying. Would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, that I think that what your question, at least to me, begins to hint at is the fact that we unfortunately operate in this world where industrial monopolies are the norm. And so, you know, as far back as the 70s, Ivan Ilyak wrote Tools for Conviviality, and there he was speaking about the fact that we need to diversify the modes of production, and that's why maker spaces like the ones that Jess works with are, for me, just so exciting, because the way that we don't lose that heritage and that difference in knowledge that is actually so valuable is by allowing everyone the tools to be able to design, as opposed to someone coming in and just like taking over a process that others can't equally engage in. And it makes me think, I don't know who put it out, but a few years back there was a sort of this meme of how brands now have all become like very, very plain and they look the same. Like, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like that just makes me literally not want to live. I'm like, I don't want to live in a world that's all just like black and white and like, this is what good design looks like. Like, no, like, let's bring color and messiness and bad design back if that's what it takes. So like, scratch the good design slide that we had up. We're going for design for bad. No, no, no. Wrong phrasing. Yay. Thank you. I had this moment of being ill last week and not knowing whether I'd told Jess that I'd wanted them to do this conversation with me. And Andres sent an email and I was like, oh no. Jess is going to be like, what is this about? But I had told you. Yeah. We're fine. And I was well enough to come and talk to you all. And yeah, please find us on all the usual channels. We'd love to keep chatting. And it's been really great. Thank you, Andres, for the invitation.
Thank you for being here. And for those of you in the room, since now we are all in the same room, just an invitation. I know that there are like other channels for this invitation, but these two groups that are here, we will meet on next Friday. So not tomorrow, but the Friday next. In Valdauro, we're going to have a calzotada, and before the calzotada, and a kind of continuation and activity that we are going to, a participatory activity on this note. I don't know if you can, if you're able, you should join, great, and you're super invited, of course. So yeah, very happy that we are able to have this space and to be continued. Thank you.